Maintaining an aging high-rise requires confronting gravity, extreme weather, and decades of silent deterioration deep inside the concrete. The Imperial House Property Updates, a longitudinal tracking log from December 2024 to the present, provide a precise look into the realities of commercial real estate capital expenditures. Management at Imperial House initiated a massive concurrent scope of work, a 50 to 60-year structural recertification, life safety egress updates, and a complete hurricane window replacement, all executed inside a fully occupied building. As the work progressed, the internal updates revealed a pattern of severe operational strain. The building experienced continuous sequencing delays, relentless demolition noise, and acute resident fatigue. A close reading of the project data shows these timeline overruns are not the result of slow contractors. They're driven by a compounding cycle, the constant discovery of hidden structural defects, triggering strict, unavoidable engineering dependencies. Identifying exactly where this scheduling breakdown occurs marks the difference between successfully rehabilitating a massive asset and plunging a property into a financially draining, liability-heavy operational crisis. The Imperial House window replacement program began with a straightforward strategy. Contractors would sequence the installation unit line by unit line, moving vertically through the A, B, C, and D tiers of the building. This chart represents the assumed initial workflow. Management projects a direct path from the demolition of the old windows straight into the installation of the new frames. This timeline is underwritten by the legal pressure of the recertification deadline. The work is a strict code compliance mandate, requiring exact execution to satisfy municipal inspectors. But the moment crews pull away the first exterior panel, they expose unexpected damage. The clean, straight schedule immediately fragments. High-rise exteriors conceal decades of weather intrusion and material fatigue. Any compliance project that opens the building envelope must be planned with the assumption that the original scope of work is obsolete from day one. We can trace this exact failure point through the building's hurricane window replacement program. Upon opening the walls to prep the window openings, contractors at Imperial House repeatedly encountered severe spalling and hidden degradation of the structural concrete beams. The inspections uncovered a litany of past construction failures: missing concrete fill, improperly applied waterproofing from older renovations, and heavily rusted fasteners securing the previous windows. These discoveries instantly invalidate baseline budgets. The installation crew cannot simply anchor a brand new hurricane window into a compromised, decaying concrete frame. In commercial real estate, this is known as scope expansion, the rapid, uncontrollable ballooning of a project's physical boundaries. The required removal of the exterior elements forces the project to pivot entirely. It ceases to be a simple installation checklist and becomes an invasive, highly complex structural remediation campaign. Once the hidden damage is exposed, the contractors hit a hard stop. Every new structural defect mandates a formal review and approval from a third-party engineering firm. The sequence reroutes upward into a mandatory engineering review by M2E. Their specific interventions create an immediate procurement bottleneck as work stalls for custom components. Once reconstructed, the concrete demands a strict 30-day cure period before any window is mounted. These cure times and waterproofing dry periods are immutable laws of chemistry. They cannot be accelerated by adding more labor to the site. On the ground, this workflow loop results in idle crews and sudden work stoppages, and residential units left with exposed walls and partial completions for weeks at a time. The delays are no longer an execution failure by the contractors. The schedule is now dictated by an iterative re-engineering process entirely outside of the property manager's daily control. As the technical dependencies stretch the timeline, executing heavy remediation inside a fully occupied building generates severe friction with the residents living through it.
Tracking management's communication logs reveals a distinct evolution. As the structural scope expands, the tone shifts from purely informational into active liability management. Management adopts increasingly defensive framing, repeatedly insisting that the relentless noise and falling artwork are unavoidable realities. They aggressively establish liability limitations. The board issues explicit warnings that once structural repairs inside a unit finish, the association will only restore the drywall to its primer coat. All custom interior millwork, paint matching, and finished surfaces remain the financial burden of the owner. Residents endure intense disruption. They face mandatory dust wall installations, weeks of lost privacy, and formal threats of forced entry if keys are unavailable. As the engineering phases drag on, the board's messaging is forced to focus on shielding the association from damage claims, a direct signal that resident construction fatigue has reached a critical threshold. Scanning the vast amount of documentation provided to owners, a major omission stands out: a near-total absence of updates regarding the building's closed swimming pool. The data suggests a clear hypothesis for this silence. The compounding structural discoveries and the strict legal mandates of life safety compliance have consumed the building's capital reserves and management bandwidth. To compensate for the frozen amenity, management highlights progress on low-complexity microprojects, documenting rapid victories like garage repainting, gate replacements, and storage reorganization. These maintenance items are completed quickly and visually prove to the owners that the internal staff is still functional. But the psychological impact of a closed pool cannot be painted over. Owners watch their most prominent quality of life amenity sit useless, while the highly disruptive, largely invisible structural work dictates the schedule. When strict life safety compliance dictates the critical path of a budget, recreational spaces become stranded assets. This disparity widens the gap of trust between the residents footing the bill and the board managing the funds. Evaluating the totality of the Imperial House longitudinal data requires separating the structural achievements from the operational realities. This matrix shows undeniable technical victories. The engineering teams are successfully executing complex concrete restoration, hitting egress compliance targets, and upgrading vital systems. However, these technical wins are offset by severe operational warning signs regarding timeline certainty, eroding resident trust, and interior damage disputes. The most critical unresolved risk is the schedule itself. Because every newly opened wall carries the threat of fresh structural decay, providing a firm, accurate completion date to the owners is mathematically impossible. Waiting right behind the schedule delays is a massive legal risk. Enforcing the strict primer-only restoration policy across hundreds of disrupted units will inevitably trigger a wave of costly disputes over interior damage responsibilities. The Imperial House project demonstrates a difficult reality. The building is successfully saving its physical structure while simultaneously breaking itself down operationally and socially. The data from Imperial House serves as a template for any property manager facing a 50 or 60-year recertification. Attempting to mask deeply rooted engineering bottlenecks behind a public relations narrative of superior quality control ultimately backfires. When residents are living in active construction zones, spinning schedule delays as a deliberate choice destroys executive credibility. True critical path planning requires radical transparency. It demands acknowledging iterative engineering loops, supply chain blockages, and mandatory concrete cure times before any contracts are signed. Surviving high-rise remediation requires boards to admit exactly what the process is. It is not a scheduled, predictable upgrade. It is an exercise in structural triage that must be carefully and methodically endured.